Hey, welcome back to the Next Peak podcast. I am still your sit-in host. I am Dr. Parker Houston, and I'm a board-certified psychologist, and I'm filling in for our primary host, Clint Herndon, who is still embroiled / buried in tax season right now. And today I have the distinct honor of speaking with Bud Lamb, who is a writer, a runner, and he helps men become the best version of themselves, the best that they can be. He is also the author of a recent book his newest book called Chasing the Sage. And it's what men want, finding purpose and passion at every stage of life. Today, we are going to be talking about why men need friendship, community, and mentors to thrive. This has been something that's been extremely influential in my own life, and I'm just super honored and excited to talk with Bud today. So Bud is joining us from the Santa Cruz area and has a really cool kayak in his background. Tell us about your kayak, Bud.
Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, it's a beater kayak. It's about 25 years old, 17 feet long, Kevlar, two bulkheads. It's built for ocean and long touring, being out and gone, just in the wilderness. And that's, so the boat kind of reflects me. I'm an old guy. I'm a beater. I've been bruised and screwed and tattooed, and I keep coming back like the ever ready rabbit. And so is my boat. So I keep that around, keep it in my office to remind me of who I am and where I'm headed. In fact, that's probably, I think, one of the primary questions to be thinking and asking and answering for men is, who am I? Who am I? And what am I doing?
Yeah. So I definitely would say that you get coolest background of I know we might be using this on YouTube later. And so most of the time people have like, a boring desk or a fan, maybe like a degree or something in their background. And I'm going to have to change mine up to be more like the kayak. I do have to ask you something else about this though. I'm reading upside down, but it does look like it says Tesla on it. Does your kayak say Tesla on the side?
Yes, it does. That's probably the original Tesla. This is a Tesla model. They don't make them anymore, and it does not have a battery.
Model K. This is the
Yes.
Model K. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine a beater since it says Tesla on the side. So,
Right.
All right, cool. Well, I didn't say this about you, but you revealed this, that you're a wild man. Your heart is for adventure. You are running marathons in your 70s, which is amazing. And you are a former pastor / still a pastor and a former Army service member.
Yep. All of that's true, but primarily human being first.
All right. Well, so yeah, let's get into the episode today. Today, we're going to be talking about why friendship, community, and mentors are needed for men in order to thrive. Certainly, this is something that women need too. So I think that if you're a woman and you're listening to this, you'll still get something out of this, but it's primarily targeted towards men. And more than a decade ago, I can't believe it's been that long, Bud you invited me into a 1-year intensive men's group. And I had never done something like this before. And it changed my life in so many ways that I just had no idea that I really needed this. Since that time, I have watched it transform countless men who've participated in this process with you. And in your book, you kind of start off with a really powerful story about you're sitting in your apartment in Oregon, you're staring at your old Army rifle or something in the corner of your apartment, and you were at a real low point in your life at that point. So can you kind of tell us that story and how community became so important for you?
Well, I went into the Army when I was 20 years old, and I did not have any kind of sense of who I was or where I was going. So I enlisted into the Army rather than be drafted. And I was also one of those soft males in the sense that I didn't really have any kind of a firm sense of who I was and what I was doing. And so I was drifting. I was just plain drifting. And when I came out of the Army, I was still drifting. And so I drifted up to Corvallis, Oregon, where I was going to somehow have to pursue this romantic idea of getting a degree in forestry and working out in the woods. And I became isolated. I didn't have I didn't know a soul up there. All the people that I known going into the Army had either moved or moved on or gotten married, and I was all alone. And so I began acting out with alcohol and drugs, and found myself just drifting, not going to college. I decided not to do that, and I had a 22 caliber single shot rifle that I grew up with, and I had it in the corner, and every so often it would almost talk to me.
Mm.
And it was the same sentence that the gun would say, and it was, "You can end this now." And you know, that season was one of such stark hopelessness, and I was living as a functional orphan. I didn't feel like I was connected to anything beyond just my isolated, tiny little small world. And it was a place where, looking back now, 40 years or so, it's hard for me to believe that I was that guy. But I have come to realize that basically we're all that guy to some degree or another, and we don't know how to reach out for help. It's a sign of weakness oftentimes. And so yeah, that was a pretty crummy season, and by the grace of God, I was able to pull out of that dive that my airplane was going in, and get pulled out of it.
Yeah. And so I love what Rick Warren says, that our purpose often comes from our pain. And so when I read that story, it helped me to understand why helping men find community and friendship and role models was such an important thing to you, because you had this really painful, awful, lonely experience. It was really heartbreaking, even just reading it. And yesterday, when we were doing our pre-show, you told a really cool kind of ancient story about not keeping community to yourself too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yes. The experience that I have having found friendship and found deep, authentic friendships is the tendency is to keep it to myself, or to just us four and no more. I don't want anybody to mess with it. And there's this ancient story, and it's got a lot of different elements to it, but it's an ancient story about four men that are standing outside of the city, and this city has been under siege for a long, long time. Drought, cannibalism going on in this ancient city. Food is scarce. No leadership from the people that are supposed to be in positions of leadership. They're surrounded by the enemy, and it's just a matter of time before catastrophe happens. It's almost kind of a pandemic kind of an experience.
Mm.
But these four guys are standing on the outskirts of town, and they're lepers. They're broken men. They're the less thans, the not known. And they're standing there, and they're having this discussion about what they ought to do. And they decide to go across the open range out to the other side, over to the enemy. And hopefully they'll put themselves at their mercy and say, "Will you give us some food?" and hope that they'll be extended mercy. And by the time they get there, the enemy had all left. They just fled. And there was a movement of God that was just terrified the enemy, and they were gone. So when these 4 lepers got there, they had all the food and all the water that they could ever imagine. And they're eating the food, they're stuffing themselves with their stubby little leper hands and with food, and they say to themselves, it's not right for us to keep this all to ourselves while our countrymen are starving. And so what they did is they took what they had and they went back across the open range and they shared the bounty with the entire city. And the city was rescued. And, to me, that story has just been such a beautiful picture of what happens when we who experience something and have something that is incredibly valuable, that we find it at great cost, whether it's a series of life painful lessons that we find it in a marriage or friendship. Once we have that, we become a steward of that. And that's part of paying it forward. And so it's not just for us, it's for us to share with others.
Yeah. And so over the years, as you've invited men into community and you've watched what it does to their lives, what do you see changes when you invite them into really creating authentic friendship, when they have a space to be vulnerable and actually share what they're struggling with and what's going on in their lives? What do you see in terms of the change and transformation?
Gosh. Well, at the very core, guys become to realize that they are, that they're okay, that they don't have to hide and be a poser, that their highest and best self, that they can actually live out of that. It's almost as though we need others, the social mirror, to help us see who we are. And when we have safe and honest, trustworthy relationships with other men, especially, I think men need to be with men. And when we have that, it helps us see who we are in our highest and best self. And apart from that, we're really looking through a glass dimly, and we look back to what we saw modeled by our dad or our coach or our uncles, and they were broken men and uninitiated. So we're learning some bad stuff from them from the very beginning. And so when we have it, we have a stronger sense of health. Were you asking about what are some of the benefits of having community? Is that part of what you were going at, Parker?
Yeah, I wanted to know what you see in terms of how they transform. But maybe right before we get into that, I was doing a little research preparing for our episode, and Cigna Healthcare, I found this really interesting thing. Cigna Healthcare last year, before the pandemic in January, did a massive study on loneliness. And now this study is cited everywhere, but they showed that 61% of Americans report that they are lonely. So that's 3 out of 5 people in the US say that they're lonely. And it has a huge effect on their mental health, on anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea that loneliness was this big of a problem in the US. And certainly the pandemic and shelter in place and working remotely, it's really, everyone says, of course, this has made the problem worse. So before we talk, I want to just take a step back for a moment. When people are lonely, what happens in their lives? You talked about your life, but what do you see happening in men's lives when they are isolated?
When the pressure gets turned on and you're isolated, most guys go for whatever is easy. They want to get out of the hot seat as fast as possible. They want to feel better rather than necessarily deal with the problem. And they'll do just about anything and everything to get that. And that creates just a whole other set of compounding problems when that happens. So the idea of isolation and stress and pressure it actually brings out the worst of us. It puts us in this crucible well, we're all alone to deal with it, and so nobody's watching, so why not? Um, and and then the momentum and the trajectory of our lives just begins to either tailspin, or we work harder, we work longer, we get more focused on work, and being successful in that way. And when we do that, we oftentimes lose a healthy relationship at home, or we wake up 30 years later and we realize that we have children that we don't even have a good relationship with them because we've been so focused on on fixing the pain through work.
Yeah. So two things I want to pull out of that so that our listeners hear it clearly. Really, really, really common for men to find their whole identity and value in the workplace. So that's like a really, really obvious, clear one. And another thing you mentioned is addiction. I know you have a background as a recovery pastor and helping people with addiction. And so you're a big proponent of that. And people can have addictions of all kinds of varying levels, can't they?
Just to be about anything. I like to joke about it. You know, I've struggled with recovery over from a lot of different things, and anywhere from Oreo cookies to cocaine to alcohol, you know, anything we can do to make us feel different, feel better rather than be better.
Wow. Yeah. So what you were saying is sometimes life can be going along okay while you're alone as a man. And then as soon as you hit a real stressful point in your life, we start reaching out for self-soothing, numbing
Yeah,
things to make us feel better.
right. Yeah. And typically we learned that from our dads.
Hmm.
We learned how to do that by our fathers. So all we
Yeah.
need to do is take a look at our dad and go, that's probably going to be me. But the interesting thing is, you know, Clint would talk about the slight edge principle, this thing about the impact of our dads on men and friendship. My dad was a loner. Um, but when we look at a guy looks at his life from, you know, like the last year or two, and he doesn't have the benefit to see the span of it, like a 30 or a 40-year life, um, we can find ourselves um, truly drifting our entire lives and not knowing it. And I think that's one of the tragedies about how isolation and aloneness can just become. We wake up and we go, oh my gosh, how did I end up here? Nobody knows who I really am.
Mm. Yeah, you know, it's weird that we're talking about this too, because the blog that I wrote this morning is about role models and mentorship. And I think the older I get as a psychologist, a lot of human behavior is really not that complicated. Um, John Maxwell has said that people do what people see. It's the first law of leadership. And so if our primary role model is our dad, yeah, it's very likely that we will end up consciously or unconsciously um, copying those same behaviors. And so who we follow and watch is just extremely important.
Yep, absolutely.
So we talked about some of the risks. One other thing that you had said when we were talking before is what happens when a man has no friends to share his problems with? Like, what's the effect on the marriage? Can you talk about that?
Mm, yeah, the effect on the marriage. Well, I guess a guy will want, men will often talk to their wives about stuff that they really ought to be talking with men in their tribe about. And it puts an unnecessary burden. It puts a burden on a woman, on a wife, to hear a husband talk and process things, because that's what a guy does with somebody else around the fire or on the trail, you know, or on the water. You know, we talk to guys and we're getting it out. We just need to get it out, and we're not even sure what we're trying to get out, but but it's finding its way out. When we do that with our wives, typically that sends our wife into a tailspin because they don't have any idea how to do this. And so they drop into mom mode.
Mm.
And if as a husband and a wife, the relationship has that dynamic in it, it won't be long before the wife begins to resent the husband, mm, because he's in a sense coming to her as a boy. And our wives don't want to be married to boys. They want full-on men. And so the one of the best ways to be a full-on guy, fully engaged in that, is to have a great group of men that you can go out behind the barn and stomp around in the dirt and throw up and get stuff out. And without that, like I said, it puts an unnecessary burden on our wives. So either we go on one hand where we start telling our wives everything that some of which is good, but some of which we don't need to, or we isolate and we just shut our wives off and everybody else. And both of those, ends of the spectrum are unhealthy. And so we need a male community to be the best husbands, best men that we can possibly be.
Yeah, so I love that. And what I take away from it is we need a pressure release valve so that all that pressure doesn't get released at our wives too, because the burden of all of our struggles and stress and things that we're going through is too much for any one person maybe to be the recipient for.
Exactly.
So turning to the benefits, and what are the benefits of having community and mentors and great friendships as a man? What do you see as what transforms in a man's life when that happens?
You got a team. You have a team of folks that you can ask questions to. You can reach out to and borrow tools. One of the best things that I have is my best friend Dennis. He lives about two blocks from here. I have access to more tools than I could ever want to buy, and so I get to borrow his tools, but I get to see him and check in and say how's it going and what's going on, and that part of connection and what do you call it? I guess it's community, but it's kind of like being a neighbor and having not so much a tribe, but being known and not being a stranger in your own home or neighborhood. And that's one of the things that to me, one of the biggest benefits is we can have, we're not alone. We have people that care about us and that will help us and listen to us, and that's tremendous. Apart from that, we're just so alone, and we don't know where to go, or what we were talking a little bit about yesterday, or we have what Scott Peck talks about, and that is this idea of pseudo community as compared to authentic community. And the idea of pseudo community is it has the illusion of deep connection, but it's really all surface. It's all about, what we did last weekend, or what I'm going to do next weekend, or what the struggle I'm having at work, or the thing with my wife, or whatever. It's all that surface stuff. It has nothing to do with what's real. And so authentic community, on the other hand, is real. And I'll tell you, that's what I love about this conversation here, Parker. It's just real. It's not scripted. It's not pretty. There's starts and stops to the conversation, and that's real. So one of the benefit. Are we talking benefits again?
Well, let me just piggyback off what you're saying and
Okay.
give an illustration. This season has been extremely difficult in my marriage, and it's just been a hard season. We're doing well. I love my wife. She is my best friend, but we can't deny that it has been really hard, and it's been hard on us. And we've had to navigate a lot of issues over the last year. And at the times when I felt the most stressed out and at my lowest, I picked up the phone and I called guys from the group that we've been mentioning.
Mm.
And if I didn't have that, the difference between having that and not having that, um, I was starting to feel isolated and alone and in the dark and more hopeless. And to be able to pick up the telephone and call another guy at any point and share what was going on, it just, you mentioned, we talked about this too, it just shifts. It has the ability to shift everything, our perspective, our level of hope. And
Mhm.
to not have had that, I don't know how I would have gotten through this season.
Well, the way you would have gotten through the season is you would have spent $180 with a therapist for only 45 minutes. And this just saves you a ton of money.
Let alone all the bad ways that I cope with stress too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's very easy to go down a bad path. So yeah, other benefits that you see.
Oh, ideas and resources. To me, it goes all the way back to just collaborating about stuff. You know, when I don't have authentic relationships, male relationships, it's up to me to figure everything out. But I have a couple guys that I talk with every week, and just the fact that I can bring up issues like, for the last 3 weeks, I've been dealing with a brake issue on my fifth wheel trailer. And I just can't figure that out. And I've gone to the dealer and I've had a repair guy look at it. But I was talking to my friend John, and John's a real smart guy. He's just handy. And he said, you need to take a look at that 7-pin connector that's coming in from your trailer into your truck. And and it was just, okay, great. And I did it, and it looks like I'm going to solve the problem. And there's any number of things like that. I have a friend who's a whiz with finances and investing, and he asked me, it's a good friend, great friend, and he was curious about my retirement, um, uh, what things look like when I choose to retire, because you don't make a ton of money as a pastor, and so he was able to ask me about that in a safe way. And he's going to help me with a very private kind of thing. And, friendships can do that. Without that, we have to, like I said, we have to pay people to help us.
Mm.
Um, and so anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. The psychology research too supports this quote that you and I have talked about. Jim Rohn says you're the average of the top 5 people you spend the most time with. And gosh, if that has not come back to me time and time again, that we do become who we spend time with. And all the psychology research shows that your health habits, even your weight, the health conditions you have, your income, your belief system, um, all of these things are dramatically affected by, we can't just use willpower to get out of it. And they're all affected by our social environment. And so having this community of men, and even what's been really valuable to me is men that are 10, 20, 30 years older than I am, just gaining their wisdom has been so amazing because they just have years and a perspective that I don't have. And that was so valuable for being part of that group.
right.
Let's switch now and talk about why do men end up alone? Like, what are the barriers that get in the way?
Oh gosh. Uh, I guess we learn from our fathers, or from our fathers. One of the barriers that I have is I never saw my dad with great friends. I saw my dad as a mentor to younger men, but I don't remember my dad having friends. I can't remember. Well, I can remember one friend my dad had, but they were basically drinking buddies. And other than that, my dad was not, was basically friendless. So I think we don't understand it, which is one barrier. Another barrier is to having friends is we, on some level, I learned who to trust and who not to trust in high school. And I played basketball in high school, and I was never a star, but I loved the game. And I can always remember that there were guys that were on the inside, that were on the first team, and they seemed to have, a different attitude about stuff. And I didn't fit into that.
Mm.
And so not fitting into the cool and the hip, um, um, either I would default to, to simpler, easier friendships, or I would default to, I don't belong anywhere. And
Mm.
so that's a barrier. Guys have never experienced it. I know that for myself, there was this season not long after the gun thing where my self-confidence was very, very low, and I was kind of insecure about everything. So having a friendship or having somebody because friendships take time and work.
Yeah.
It doesn't, we just don't start off. They're so painful to get started, and we don't know how to do it. And so you can invest a lot of time in the wrong kind of people, and then you end up with, crummy friendships, and your average goes down, in a sense.
Yeah. So what I take from that is that we may not know what we're looking for if we haven't taken the time to think about it. We may have not had good role models for what a great friendship actually looks like. And so that makes it more difficult to look for and to find. And it takes a lot of time. And I know a lot of men that spend most of their time in the workplace, and they just don't make the time to create those friendships. Or as you said, it can also be very surface level. It might be just based around drinking or sports or hobbies or something like that. And it never goes to this more, I think you said, like the level of the heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe just in closing, let's talk about this. I want to just kind of transition to this idea of our fathers and how that affects us, because that's something that you have helped a lot of folks work through. And it was something that you shared with me at a really critical part in my life. We do get so many of these habits from our fathers. And my dad died about 6 years ago, and you came alongside me during that time. And I had a lot of anger and resentment towards my dad. And you had encouraged me, Parker, how do you want to go into this? How do you want your dad to remember these kind of last months? How do you want to feel about these last months with your dad? And I am confident that had you not come alongside me and kind of challenged me to do that, I would feel a lot of regret around the way that I handled it and the way that I treated my dad on his deathbed. And so I just wanted to thank you for doing that. And I wonder how many men are dealing with resentment towards their dads, and how they should approach that and why it's important. So can you talk about that for a minute too? And you had your own experience with your father.
Oh man. Yeah. This father and son thing. Um, they, we as a kid, we always look at our lives through our own filter, and we have no idea, really. We're not interested in the fact that, when my dad was 35 years old, he had 4 kids under the age of 10.
Mm.
He was beginning his second, his second large assignment in his work. And the stress was very high. He moved the entire family from one part of the country to another. This is happening when he was 35. From my standpoint, as a kid, as a 10-year-old. Where was dad? I was abandoned. He was gone. He was not showing up for baseball. He was not coming to any of my games. He was coming home late. He always smelled like beer. He was hiding out in his room. He was not around. And once I moved into my mid-30s and started realizing who I was becoming, the playing field got a whole lot more level with my dad. And I was able to see him as much as a journeyman as I was in the process. And I believe sooner or later, we men, us guys, we have to come to terms with that our dads were doing the best that they possibly could with the hand of cards that they got dealt.
Yep.
And something Sam and Gifford Keane talk about in their book, Prodigal Son, Prodigal Father, I think that's the title, is the son says to his dad, in essence, the statute of limitations is up. I'm no longer going to hold you to that standard that I can't even live to myself. And I believe it's the son that needs to make the movement to the dad, to extend forgiveness, to put the resentment away, and to see your dad like any other man, every man, doing the best they can with what they have, and to meet him on those terms rather than on, you need to show up in a way that I think you need to do. You do that, you're being a punk kid again. Be a man. Step into the man thing. Extend grace and reach out to that father of yours that's waiting for a man to do that for him.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It even stings me a little to still hear you say that, because that was my heart towards my dad, just deep frustration and resentment and a lot of anger. Of course, my dad had amazing qualities of unconditional love also. But had I not gone through that process, I would have so much regret about the way that I navigated that season when my dad died. And you shared a story about sitting on a bench with your dad too at the end of his life, and I think you were at maybe was it Echo Lake?
Yeah, it was Echo Lake in October, and the wind was howling. It was howling, and we're on. And by the way, this was after years of me doing this, I'll call it soul work and my faith work of having God, putting me back together in ways that I couldn't do it on my own. And literally we're sitting on this stone bench facing, I guess it'd be north, down towards the lower lake. And we're wrapped up in blankets, and I don't know, my dad is, 75 or almost 80, and I'm in my late 50s or something like that. And from a distance, from behind, if people were looking at what they were doing and what my dad and I were doing, they would probably see two old guys sitting there having a conversation. They would never guess this was father and son. And the thing with fathers and sons, it's not how we start, it's how we finish. And as sons, we can take the initiative with our dads and finish well.
Wow.
It won't be easy, but we can do this.
Yeah. And I love that story. I think about it all the time. So I'm glad you got a chance to share it here. But being part of the group of men, just to kind of, in a recap, I was able to finish that season with my dad, finish well because of your encouragement and the encouragement of the other guys in the group. And even at his funeral, I looked out and I had this ocean of faces, maybe 15, 20 guys from the group,
slick, wasn't it? That was great.
Supporting me at the moment where my dad died, when I was speaking at his funeral. And the feeling that I had from that kind of emotional support and a community of people and men supporting me was just incredible. And I also gleaned so much from your wisdom, having been way ahead of me on well, let's not say way ahead, but ahead of me on the journey. and navigating that with your dad was so helpful because it was something I didn't know about because I hadn't been through it. So in closing, why don't we talk about so if men are alone and they are feeling isolated or they see themselves drifting towards that, how can they take action to begin to develop a sense of community around them?
Great question. I think the first thing is to realize that in order to, if you don't have honest friendships, you need to practice being an honest friend. Like be one to find one, and then realize that you're gonna just put what I do is I will tell us, I'll meet somebody and I'll tell a story about myself or something, or I'll ask them a question about themselves, and I'll just keep initiating and asking. And if I get a response, then typically what I'll do is I'll invite them to a cup of coffee, or I'll say, let's go for a run or whatever. I'll look for some common thread. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever it is, but I think what it all comes down to with regards to this idea of friendship building is take initiative. Don't wait. People don't, you take the initiative. If you need it, ask for people. Just flat up ask. All they can say is no.
Yeah.
But ask. I think that's absolutely the first and the last thing, probably. Just take initiative and keep it up. Go to a church, go to a 12-step meeting, go to join a runners club, go on a trail hike with some people, what do they have over at Bayside Church? Bayside Adventure Sports, be part of something like that. Hang out with people who like you want to be. Join a Zoom team meeting on something and chat with somebody and but take the initiative.
Yeah. And I might just add one last thing to that making the time, like it might mean you got to dial back your hours at the office, because if you don't have the space for friendship, it can't grow. Well, it has been an honor to have you on the show, Bud. I know people are going to get a lot from thinking about this topic. I think it's one of the most important things that they could possibly be thinking about, especially as we get more digitally disconnected. Is there anything else you want to add before I wrap us up?
No, just keep it up. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the show this week, Parker. I appreciate it very much. It's always
awesome.
Nice to hang out.
Yeah. Well, great to talk with you in this forum. And so, yeah, thanks for joining us on the Next Peak podcast. I want to recommend Bud's website. It is budlamb.com, BUDLAMB.com. It'll be in the show notes. So check out his website if you're interested in his mentoring services. And also check out his book on Amazon, which is Chasing the Sage. And you can find his podcast, which is called Bud Lamb Talks, on just about any platform that you would look for. So until the next episode, keep climbing your next peak.